Welcome to my Screencast. Today we will be learning about learning disabilities. Learning disability is defined as a group of neurological conditions that interfere with a person's learning. Learning disability is often referred to as LD. Oftentimes these learning disabilities are not obvious and can go unrecognized or undiagnosed. There are many different disorders that are included under LD. These disorders can relate to listening, speaking, reading, and math calculation. In 1937, Samuel Orton, who was a neuropathologist, came up with the term strephosymbolalia to describe the issue he saw with children who had difficulties reading. This eventually led to the understanding of dyslexia. In the 1940s and 50s, medical research was very limited. If LD students received any help at all, they were simply placed in their classes for educatively retarded. In the 1960s and 70s, terms such as dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia began to be used. LD students were placed in resource rooms. In the 1990s, Congress passed the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which were funding services to those with disabilities. In the 1980s to 2000s, medical research started again on learning disabilities due to new technology. Genetic studies began. New terms were used such as reading disability, math disability, and writing disability. LD students were served in a variety of settings. 1963, formation of Association for Children with Learning Disabilities. 1997, IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, was reauthorized. And I believe that's supposed to be 1993, not 1963. There are 5 main contributors in this movement of LD education. Samuel Kirk suggested the term for learning disability rather than the old term, minimally brain damage, at a meeting of concerned parents in Chicago in 1963. B.F. Skinner, a psychologist that researched animal and human behavior, led to the popularity of behavior modification in the 1960s. J.K. Torgenson, a researcher that suggested that reading disabilities were actually caused due to deficits in phonological awareness. Samuel Orton, who was a neuropathologist, came up with the term strephosymbolalia to describe the issue he saw with children who had difficulties with reading. This eventually led to the understanding of dyslexia. William Cruikshank suggested that those being classified as retarded but actually showing normal intelligence when tested non-verbally, were struggling due to having deficits in perception and attention, not intelligence. Public Law 94-142. This was the first special education law passed by Congress. It passed in 1975. This law ensures that handicapped children from 3 to 21 receive free and appropriate public education in a least restrictive environment. Although the law was great, the one flaw was that it did not provide any extra funding to help educate the handicapped students. IDEA. This is the Individual with Disabilities Education Act. It was an expansion of the Public Law 91-142. It redefined the definition of LD, which allowed for more specific guidelines on who was included and who was excluded under the label LD. Section 504. This is a Civil Rights Act that was designed to help children who needed an extra support but are not included in the IDEA definition of learning disability. There are 7 categories that qualify children for modification: drug or alcohol dependency, ADD/ADHD, health needs, communicable diseases, social maladjustment, a learning disability without severe discrepancy, and if a student exited special education program but still has a disability. Causal factors. Learning disabilities could be caused by a number of things: or trauma, prenatal conditions, or teratogens such as use of alcohol or tobacco, a childhood exposure to neurotoxins, which is lead, arsenic, mercury, etc. Basically any poisoning metals or anything that's bad for the human. Complications during pregnancy, delivery, or prematurely could be inherited as well. Incidence factors. It's hard to say exactly how many people have learning disabilities since the definition varies. There are many that have undiagnosed learning disabilities due to differences in the standards from state to state. There are many more boys that are being diagnosed with learning disabilities than girls, with a 3-to-1 ratio. This could be because boys are more susceptible to brain damage than girls. Boys also tend to be more disruptive in class and draw more attention from their teachers. Characteristics of LD. Phonological deficits are trouble with reading, writing, and language. Perceptual deficits, the brain misinterprets sensory information. Need to have phonic awareness, can set up intervention programs for students that may be at risk or are reading disabled. So basically, intervention programs are programs set up by schools or teachers or outside resources that give extra help to students that need it. Three co-occurring conditions. ADHD. This is a disorder that co-occurs with LD in 1 of every 3 students. The symptoms of ADHD include impulsivity, inability to complete routine tasks, distractibility, inability to stand or sit with blurting out, low frustration tolerance, overreaction to stimuli, sleep disturbances, incessant talking, inattention, and more. Conductive disorder. This disorder can often co-occur with ADHD. Individuals with this disorder may exhibit the symptoms for ADHD as well as a lack of respect for others. They get mad easily and do things like unintentionally break the rules, lie, and are cruel to animals, people, etc. Tourette's syndrome is a genetically inherited neurological disorder. Symptoms include involuntary motor tics or vocal tics. Programs and settings in least restrictive environments. Birth to age 3. Programs can start even before birth if it is believed that the baby could be at risk. Local public school systems can offer assistance to the parents, such as counseling, locating needed services, and parenting advice. If the baby is identified between birth to 3 years old, an early intervention team can evaluate the baby. If needed, an individualized family service plan can be devised by state agencies. If a child is identified as LD between the ages of 3 and 5, there are services available through the local early intervention team. Service can be provided in a student's preschool, daycare, or even at home. Programs and settings in the least restrictive environments, ages 5 to 21. There are multiple settings as students can receive services once they are enrolled in school. The least restrictive environment a student can receive services in the regular education classroom setting with some accommodations within the room. To keep a student in the general education setting, a special education personnel could come into class and assist a student. This is called co-teaching. Or a special educator could meet with the general education teacher to plan out a program for the student. There are also less inclusive ways that a student can receive services. A student could go to a resource room where they can receive additional help for a part of their day. The student could also be placed in a class specifically designed for LD students for a part of their day. It is up to the student's IEP team to decide what the student needs in order to make progress academically. There are additional services available to the students, such as speech therapists or occupational therapists. These services are available until the student turns 21, or, depending on the state, to up to 26. Michigan goes to 26 for their students. Anatomy of the brain. The central nervous system, CNS, is a part of the body responsible for learning. Nerves throughout the body are picking up signals and sending them through the spinal cord to the brain. The smallest part of the CNS is the neuron. The neuron communicates messages from all throughout the body by the neurotransmitters. Different parts of the brain are responsible for different functions. The brainstem is responsible for automatic functions such as breathing, heart rate, and digestion. The cerebellum controls all body movements such as posture and balance. The cerebral cortex is all conscious activities. The two hemispheres are contralateral, so the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, and the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. The hemispheres are split up into different lobes: frontal lobe, problem-solving; temporal lobe, hearing and language. Parietal lobes control the sensory information such as taste, touch, pressure, and pain. Occipital lobe is the visual information center. How brain injuries affect learning. Brain injuries can have an effect on learning and behavior. There are many ways brain injury can occur, such as car accidents, falls, but a common way is from sports. Concussions are a common brain injury, but unfortunately, if an individual has multiple concussions, their learning and memory can be permanently affected. The brain's plasticity declines with age. Plasticity is the brain's ability to compensate when there is damage to a certain area. Depression and problems sleeping are also associated with traumatic brain injury. Depending on where the injury was to the brain, certain functions can be affected. For example, if the frontal lobe is damaged, and the individual has trouble with decision making and problem solving. So basically, a concussion is when the head gets hit and the brain shifts and hits the inner layer of the skull, causing it to swell and bleed, and it's not a good thing. Autism and the brain. Autism is a neurological disorder that severely affects a child's development. Symptoms include difficulties with language and social interactions, problems interacting with others, communicating, and maintaining socially appropriate behaviors, difficulty interpreting emotions and facial expressions. Autism is a heritable disorder, and there are structural differences in the brain. An abnormally large brain volume in the white cerebellar matter and a large cortical gray matter, which decreases over the years. Basically, autism physically changes the brain and can affect students in many ways. It's becoming more and more prominent in special education classrooms, and I think that the research on it needs to continue in order so we know how to deal with it in the classroom in the most effective way. ADHD and the brain. ADHD is actually linked to environmental factors rather than being linked to genetics. ADHD symptoms are caused by the brain inconsistently processing sensory input. Sometimes messages are sent normally, but other times messages are not processed the same typical organized way. This causes individuals to act disorganized and it affects their ability to focus. Some students have shown that structures in the brain of those with ADHD function differently than they typically would, and the brain processes things in a unique way. Another factor that contributes to ADHD is the fact that those with ADHD tend to have more excitatory chemicals in their brain. A study showed that it is easier for those with ADHD to focus on digital media such as computer or video games. And the excitatory chemicals are basically what give energy in the brain, what makes kids with ADHD struggle to focus and to pay attention. Biochemical influences on learning. Medication for those who have ADHD and Tourette syndrome and related disorders have been proven to be extremely beneficial and decrease the undesirable behaviors. Stimulants such as coffee, caffeine, and pharmaceuticals can affect the speed that information is processed to the brain. And all of those things, the coffee, sugar, caffeine, pharmaceuticals, are all excitatories that go straight to the brain and cause them to misbehave. Imbalances in the biochemicals in the body are influenced by many factors. Metacognition research. This is a knowledge and control This is the knowledge and control that individuals have their own